Well, hello everybody, and welcome to another episode of Making Biblical Family Life Practical. I'm Hal,
And I'm Melanie.
and we welcome you for this episode as we jump back in here. You know, the question we had was, what about children who are picky? Or rather, what can you do to prevent your kids from being picky eaters?
Well, yeah, that's something we were really concerned about
Mm,
when we started having kids because we both grew up in families with really picky eaters.
the- uh, yeah, present. I mean, that's me. Yeah.
Yeah, and we just didn't want our kids to be that way because
Mhm.
it's hard. Life is hard as a picky eater. For
Yeah.
example, I really was not a picky eater, but the few things I didn't like I
Uh,
didn't like peanut butter. Do you know how hard life is for a kid who doesn't like peanut butter?
Probably like a kid in the South who doesn't like watermelon.
It's really tough
Hmm.
because you
Yeah.
get left out of things because people just assume. I remember going on a school field trip
Yeah.
and said they would provide bag lunches, and I get there and it was peanut butter and jelly, and I thought, well, no lunch
There's
for me.
no lunch for Melanie. Yeah. Well, I get.
Yeah,
Well, okay. You know, if you want to start biblical, if you allow somebody to have a really picky attitude about food, then they're not grateful for God's provision, and they're not
right.
gracious guests when people provide for them. And there's a lot of limitations in there that are built into that. So, you know, as the one who was more the picky eater myself, when our kids were little, I thought, I want my children to be better about this than I am.
I can't tell you how much I respect that because I was really concerned. And you decided that you were not going to complain about food
Right.
and that you would eat whatever was on the plate. And if you couldn't eat it, you at least moved it around so it looked like you ate it and you never complained. And so our kids didn't even figure out there were a lot of foods you didn't like until they were teens, probably.
And they were so delighted. They thought that's so fun, to realize that dad has been the picky eater all this time and
Nobody knew.
nobody knew. Yeah. Well,
But that took a lot of self control on your part.
I was just trying to
And
be intentional about it.
but I
And
think it made a huge difference in our kids' attitude toward food.
well,
You know?
kids look to their parents to understand the world that is opening up around them. And I got a really good illustration of that one time because I remember when we were young parents and we had like two or three, I guess this was third. Yeah, this was our third child, and he was just, getting out of his toddler years. And we were buying some groceries. Occasionally we get these flats of miscellaneous canned goods at the discount end of the grocery store. And I was putting these away in the pantry one day, and there was a can of black olives in there. And I don't really care for olives. But my son, who will remain nameless right now, comes wandering and he says, "What's that?" And I said, "Oh, those are black olives. Would you like to try one?" And he's, "Oh, okay." And so I fed this little 3 or 4 year old guy, a whole black olive out of the jar, and he loved it. He thought it was the best thing ever. And to this day, he loves olives, and he's raising a bunch of olive eating children of his own now. That they hide the olives from one another, and it's really funny. But it was
To
just
the point that a couple of Christmases ago, one of the now dad's
hmm
siblings,
hmm
one of our kids, gave my grandson a can of olives for
hmm
Christmas and gave him two cans, one for dad, one to share, and one for you.
hmm That's right. So, it's one of those kind of things where it's like when that little toddler falls down and they look up to see, should I be alarmed about this? And, if you if you can tell they're not injured and you just basically play it off, then that little child will say, "Oh," and they'll get up and go about their business, and if they're really hurt, then you fuss over them. But it's the same way with the food, you give them something new and they look at it and they say, "What is this?" And they look at mom and they look at dad and say, "Do they seem to like this?" If dad's got his lip curled saying, "I don't like this,"
Then they're not touching it.
and so yeah, so that's one of the important things I think is be the example.
Yeah,
You
your
know,
attitude toward food is going to make a big difference towards your kids.
uh,
And even if you struggle with food, having a good attitude about it and not making a big deal about that in front of your kids can make a big difference.
I'm reminded. I was going to bring history in. I'm reminded of a story that was in Benjamin Franklin's autobiography. He said he was one of a great big family. They had 8 or 10 kids or something that he was growing up with, and they were really pretty poor, and his parents had a rule that you were not allowed to comment about the food. Not, I love this or I don't like this. You were just thankful for whatever this was. And so, he grew up with this idea that, hey, whatever comes on your plate, you're thankful for that, and you don't make judgments about it one way or the other. And you know, I think the cook needs to be praised if it's something really good, but I see there's some wisdom in there.
Well, one of the things we did not want we did not want dinner time struggles to
Hmm.
be a big part of our family life.
Hmm.
We wanted the family table to be a place where everybody was happy and it was joyful and people looked forward to eating together. And so we didn't want to have a bunch of struggles and ugliness and you have to do this and you have to do that.
Hmm.
And so that started really early, even back in babyhood,
Hmm.
where we didn't give our kids baby foods. We fed them from the table things that they were
Hmm.
able to eat.
Yeah.
And so they grew up not having some bland mush, but having whatever we were eating. So the flavors and textures of our family table were comfortable to them. That's all they'd ever had.
I
Um,
remember when our oldest was about 7, and I was on a business trip, and the whole family come along as we tended to do, and we went to an Indian restaurant, and we had tandoori chicken and naan bread and all the great Indian stuff, and the boys were just gobbling it up because they've grown up eating a variety of spices and cuisines and stuff. It's because we have kind of eclectic recipes in our home. And the restaurateurs were so delighted to see these young American kids just loving the Indian food. They gave them free dessert.
yeah,
They
they
was like,
kept
"Oh, this
bringing them
is
food to
it was
try.
just awesome." So yeah,
Well, back to complaining.
okay.
One of the things we have not tolerated at our table is
Hmm.
complaining.
Hmm.
And so our rule was that if you complained about the food,
Hmm.
now if you didn't eat it, that's okay. But
Hmm.
if you complained about it,
Hmm.
then you had to stand up behind your chair and watch everybody eat for a little while.
That was a rule for any sort of misdemeanor at the
That was
table.
pretty tough. That was pretty tough for little boys
Oh gosh, yeah,
because they're hungry
yeah,
and standing there for just a few minutes watching everybody eat really
yeah.
made them not want to complain again.
Oh yeah.
So that's one of the rules that we had.
Uh-huh.
Um, I do want to say up front, though,
Hmm.
that if you're dealing with a child that's having sensory issues, you need to be cautious. You need to be merciful.
Okay.
Because we did require our kids to have the number of bites that they were years old
Okay.
so that we could be sure they actually tried things.
Hmm.
But if I had a child who was really struggling, who was having nausea or
Hmm.
gagging when they tried something, I would
Hmm.
back off because having a child who's not a picky eater is not more important than your relationship with your child.
There's an element of mercy in there. Well,
Yeah.
and see, and then that's an escape clause that we wrote into our family rules, so to speak. We said, okay, everybody is allowed to have one thing that they really don't like.
And I'll
You know,
accommodate that.
and so we had one who just could not stand mayonnaise, couldn't take mayonnaise at all, the texture, the whatever. And another one didn't like peanut butter or whatever. They said there was one. Okay, we'll allow you one thing that you're allowed to say. I really don't like that,
Yeah.
but that's it. And that was a good rule because they realized, okay, there is some room for me to have tastes and preferences, just not about everything.
But what do you do about the kid who's
Hmm.
just determined not to try it? It looks yucky. We had one of those.
Hmm.
It was fried okra. Now, y'all, we're
Hmm.
from the South. Maybe you're thinking, oh, I don't blame them. But in the South, in the South,
Okay.
we eat a lot of okra and our family loves fried okra.
Yes.
And
I just turn it off so it's
it
quiet.
turn off your,
There.
okay.
That's all.
In the South, we love fried
Yeah.
okra. Our family loves fried okra. I did not want this child to miss out on that delight.
Right.
And so what I did is I planned
Mm-hmm.
one night that I would make dinner late.
Mm-hmm.
And I would make the fried okra before I made the rest of dinner.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And so I fried this okra.
Mm-hmm.
I put it on a platter on the table. And I said, oh, so sorry, dinner's late, kids, but you can snack on the okra till dinner's ready.
Mm-hmm.
And this little one comes by and is like, okra. I said, that's okay. You don't have to
Mm-hmm.
eat it. And
Mm-hmm.
pretty pretty soon, about 5 minutes later, I see this little one sneak in
Hmm.
and get one piece.
I'm starving. I'll eat
I'll
anything.
eat anything. A few minutes later, a couple more pieces. Well, let's just say she loves fried okra today because
Right.
hunger is the best sauce.
There was a story in our family. One of our family members, uh, their parents had grown up during the Depression, and they were in a large family and not living on a lot of income when she was young. And she said that her mom always, whenever they had anything with cabbage, she would make a big deal out about the core of the cabbage, the big
Yeah.
hard crunchy bit in the middle, and like that was the best thing ever. And all those kids grew up thinking, boy, that big crunchy stalk in the middle of the
The
cabbage, I
part we
just
usually throw away.
yeah, oh gosh, I just love that. I'm thinking, wow,
Yeah.
that was one I would be picky about.
Yeah.
But
And and so how do you raise kids who
uh,
aren't picky
mhm,
eaters? I think your attitude is going to be the biggest issue.
that's really the truth.
Because if you're complaining and whining and picky, you can expect your kids to do the same. They want to be like you. And
Yeah.
if and don't allow complaining. You
Hmm.
know, it was always okay for our kids to move their food around. I'm not going to get mad at you if you don't eat your food. You're not going to see it again in another meal. I figure if you don't eat lunch today, well, you're going to be really hungry by the time dinner comes around.
Yeah.
Yeah, we didn't force kids to eat ever. That's
Hmm.
not a good thing. That's not a healthy thing.
Hmm.
But they weren't allowed to complain about it either because that's ungracious.
Hmm.
And little did we know that the Lord had prepared for us the
Hmm.
crazy life that we live, where we stay in people's homes all over the world,
Literally.
literally, and eat whatever they put in front of us.
Yes.
And sometimes you have to just master yourself and eat whatever you've got. Like I will never forget
Hmm.
seeing you eat a big hunk of broccoli at a
Hmm.
important meal in Tokyo
Not one of my favorite vegetables, I'll
or
admit.
Osaka. I guess it was Osaka.
Uh,
But yeah, you know,
yeah, but in the situation where they're in a ministry, we're there for the process of ministering to people.
yeah,
We're there as a testimony, and you think, I've got to. Food is not going to be an issue.
yeah,
We're not going to make. We had a friend who was a former missionary to Papua New Guinea, and he said one of the biggest things that he ever did was he learned to eat raw yams out of the field, just like the tribe there that he was ministering to,
now, y'all,
and
that's
they.
not like a southern yam. It's
Oh
not
no,
sweet. He says it
no,
tastes like an aspirin.
he said it was like chewing up Tylenol, but honestly, he said whenever they introduced him to their friends from other tribes, they would say, "Oh, this is Ron, and he eats yams with us." Which apparently a lot of the Westerners who had come through there just said, "Oh man, I can't eat that. How do you eat this stuff?" But he had made it. He said he had to kind of draw the line at grubs, but he ate the yams with them, and that was part of his testimony. And so and that's one of those things. You want your children to be prepared for wherever God's going to call them. And sometimes food and hospitality is going to be a critical part of that.
And learning to eat what's put before you without complaining can be really important. I remember one trip that we took, we stayed like at 5 different people's houses over 5 days of traveling,
Mm-hmm.
and every single family served us chili.
Now,
Every
yeah,
one of
it was
them.
it was remarkable. By the end of the trip, they bring out a pot of chili, and the kids would kind of glance at us. We'd say, "Yeah," but nobody complained.
Nobody
And
complained.
we had some nice variations on it.
We
It wasn't
really
all the
did.
same.
It was interesting,
Yeah.
but I think
Hmm.
giving mercy to those who struggle for good reasons,
Hmm.
sensory issues or whatever.
Right.
Absent that stuff, I think it's really worthwhile to teach your kids not to be picky. I think it pays off.
It really does. And you're right. I mean, you need to be sensitive to your kids. When are they just being childish and they need to grow up a little bit? And when is it that they maybe not just a sensory issue, maybe they have a sensitivity to something.
Yeah.
Maybe they feel a reaction to one of the seasonings or one of the components. I mean, you need to be aware of what's going on with your kids and not just focused on your goal here. But all in all, I'm very thankful that our kids have not been picky. They've not grown up that way, and they're seeing the benefit of it now as adults, most of them. So,
Yeah.
yeah,
And so are their kids.
yeah, all right, very good. Well, look, we appreciate you joining us. I mean, we are all on this journey of raising children, hopefully for the glory of God, And there's an awful lot that goes into that. Sometimes things that you never thought of before. So that's our take on raising kids who are not picky eaters.
Find us at raisingrealmen.com and anywhere on social media
Hmm.
at Raising Real Men or at Helen Melanie.
Great.
For more on parenting,
Hmm.
especially boys, check out Raising Real Men,
Hmm.
Surviving, Teaching, and Appreciating Boys. And I
Right.
think you'll love it. You can find it at our website or anywhere you buy books.
All right. So until next time, I'm Hal.
And I'm Melanie.
Thanks for joining us.